The invitation arrived in an envelope lined with gold, the kind of stationery that whispered importance and reeked of old popularity. I held it between my fingers like it might bite, a printed reminder of the place where I'd been least seen and most mocked. McKinley High Class of 2013 to 12-year reunion, it read, with cheerful confidence that assumed everyone had something worth showing off. I thought about tossing it, but a flicker of something sharp and hot lit up behind my ribs. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of my lips, because I knew I wouldn't just attend. I would own that night. Before I continue narrating the story of Elena Rodriguez, please consider giving this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel. 12 years ago, I left that gymnasium in tears, wearing a borrowed dress and mascara smudged with humiliation. My mother had been so proud of me that night, holding my hand after prom as I cried quietly in the passenger seat of our dented Corolla. I remember her saying, "Dignity isn't about what you wear, it's about how you carry what they throw at you." At the time, it had felt like small comfort, but now I understood it was a blueprint. Everything I'd built since, every line of code, every sleepless night, had been stitched with that very dignity. In the days leading up to the reunion, I made careful preparations, none of them for myself. The catering company? Purchased 3 months earlier through a silent holding. The venue? Reserved with a contract that ensured complete control of the night's schedule, decorations, and surprise announcements. No one had any idea that the entire event had been orchestrated by the girl they once called Elena the Earnest. Like being sincere was something shameful. I arrived early dressed in a second-hand dress 2 sizes too small and a faded red Target polo, my name tag slightly crooked for effect. Every detail had been chosen with surgical precision. The way the fabric pulled awkwardly at the shoulders, the way my hair was pinned just imperfectly enough, the dull scuffs on my flats. I smiled at myself in the rearview mirror, then practiced the look of defeated politeness one more time. This wasn't just a performance. It was a reckoning, and I needed to play the part until the final act. I stepped out of the car, clutching my oversized purse like it held my last dollar, and walked into my history. Inside, the gymnasium had been transformed into something resembling a charity gala, streamers in school colors, twinkling lights, and round tables with name cards and high-end centerpieces. I saw them immediately. Jessica Martinez and her orbiting satellites, Ashley and Brittany, perfectly positioned near the bar, cocktail dresses glinting under the disco ball. Their laughter traveled across the room like perfume, light, sharp, and entirely designed to be noticed. I kept my head down and approached the registration table, where Katie Morrison's eyes widened just slightly at the sight of me. "Elena Rodriguez," she said with exaggerated warmth, handing me a name tag with the caution of someone who half expected me to disappear into the wallpaper. As I pinned the plastic square to my chest, I caught a glimpse of myself in a nearby mirror. I looked exactly how they expected me to, underwhelming, unimpressive, and unimportant. That illusion was necessary. It gave them the confidence to do what they always did. They needed to believe they were still better, and I needed them to expose that belief, publicly and with full volume. Jessica's voice rang out across the room like a bell at a courthouse execution. "Elena, is that you?" she said with faux surprise so thick you could spread it on a cracker. "Oh wow, you still look exactly the same." Her eyes flicked up and down like scanners, cataloging every faux flaw I had curated. "Are you still working at Target?" The crowd began to drift closer, drawn in by the scent of blood in the water. Jessica held court like always, her husband Brad at her side, with his real estate smile and confidence borrowed from someone else's accomplishments. "So, Elena," she said, waving an invisible mic like a game show host, "what's the 5-year plan? Assistant manager? Or are you aiming for those sweet seasonal shifts?" Laughter rippled out from the core of their group, and I ducked my head, letting a shaky laugh slip out. I clutched my purse tighter, my eyes wide and watery. I pulled a crumpled brochure from my purse, the Riverside Community College catalog. I deliberately roughed up to look desperate. "I've been looking into business classes," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "You know, marketing, maybe accounting." Jessica feigned interest. Ashley murmured something about a cleaning lady, and Brittany suggested we could be study buddies. My smile was the perfect blend of grateful and ashamed. Internally, I noted Brittany's mortgage, paid on time every month by her husband's firm, which was in my investment portfolio. Jessica leaned in slightly, her smile gleaming with condescension. You know, Elena, you always had dreams back in school. Remember AP Econ? I guess not all of us can keep up that kind of ambition. I nodded, letting the blow land visibly on my face. Brad offered a patronizing chuckle, adding, "Hey, honest work is honest work. Not everyone's cut out for the big leagues." I let silence stretch between us for a beat too long, then muttered, "Yeah, just happy to be working it all." I felt eyes on me from all sides, the familiar spotlight of public judgment warming my face. Someone whispered, "Bless her heart," behind me, the cruelest benediction in the suburban gospel. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting shadows under my eyes like bruises. I was the perfect image of a dream deferred. The DJ changed the song, and someone whooped near the drinks table. But our corner of the room had become the stage, and Jessica was milking it for all it was worth. "Let's all raise a glass to Elena," she said mockingly, "for surviving the retail battlefield." I accepted the imaginary toast with a nod, and inside I felt the seconds ticking down. In just a few minutes, the principal would take the mic. I slipped toward the back of the room, positioning myself in the shadows near the scholarship board. Each smiling face behind glass was a student funded by my foundation. Each story was a chapter in the book they thought I'd never write. I touched one photo gently, letting my fingers rest on the nameplate. The ink had barely dried on the latest scholarship, and tonight its source would be revealed. The gymnasium's buzz dimmed as Principal Williams tapped the mic, the speakers squealing with an old-age whine. People turned toward the makeshift stage, where folding chairs had been arranged in rows like a small-town courtroom. Jessica and her crew slid into the front, arranging their dresses and posture like they were preparing for a photo op. I stayed back by the display board, partially hidden behind a trophy case, my fingers curled around the strap of my purse. The moment I'd planned for 3 years was finally unfolding, and every detail was right on schedule. "Ladies and gentlemen," Williams began, squinting over his reading glasses at a yellowed paper, "thank you for joining us tonight." He cleared his throat as the room settled, hands finding knees, eyes turning forward. "This reunion isn't just about remembering the past," he said, "but also celebrating those who are helping shape the future." The words slid into the crowd like seeds waiting for the right moment to bloom. Jessica leaned toward Brad and whispered something, probably a snide comment about the decorations. "In fact," the principal continued, "we've got a very special announcement this evening." He gestured toward the large board beside me, the one with the scholarship recipients lined up like yearbook pages. This year, 12 scholarships have been awarded through the Martinez Foundation for Educational Excellence. The name dropped like a boulder into a shallow pool, the ripples moving faster than anyone could hide. Jessica's head jerked slightly, eyes darting to the stage, and then to Brad's equally puzzled face. "Over the next 20 years, Williams said, his voice rising with emotion, "this foundation will fully fund the education of deserving McKinley students, tuition, housing, books, everything." The applause broke like a wave, rolling through the crowd with the momentum of real gratitude. I clapped too, slow and steady, blending in with the noise as eyes began to turn, scanning for the benefactor. Jessica looked smug for a second, probably assuming it was her moment. Brad looked confused, but smiled anyway, like he might claim credit by proximity. Williams smiled and raised a hand, quieting the room just enough. "Please join me in celebrating the anonymous donor who made this possible," he said, pausing dramatically. This person wished to remain unnamed but insisted that the foundation carry a name synonymous with excellence. Jessica straightened her back, her shoulders rising like a queen expecting a crown. Then came the blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for the Martinez Foundation." The room erupted again, but this time with murmurs threading through the cheers like cracks in porcelain. Jessica's mouth opened, then closed, her smile twitching as she turned to Brad. "Did you?" she started. But Brad shook his head, his brow furrowed. I watched her pupils dilate as her social instincts kicked in, realizing she was now the center of attention. Phones were raised, pictures taken, videos already uploading. Her name, echoing through the room, no longer belonged to her alone. "I don't understand," Jessica whispered, her hands smoothing the front of her dress in slow, mechanical strokes. Ashley leaned in, saying something about the boutique's lease renewal. Brittany's expression had frozen in something close to terror as she glanced around the room. Their husbands clustered together, confused and anxious, clearly sensing something was happening that none of them controlled. Jessica, ever the strategist, adjusted her expression into something neutral. I stepped forward quietly, slipping through the crowd like smoke. The lights caught my crooked name tag, and I saw at least 3 phones lower as their owners registered who I was. My steps were slow but deliberate, the kind of walk that carried a message. No one stopped me. No one even moved as I made my way toward the edge of the stage. Williams gave me a nod, not in recognition of who I was, but out of courtesy for a guest who appeared moved by the moment. I didn't climb the stage or touch the mic. I simply stood at the edge, hands folded in front of me, as Williams called up the first scholarship recipient. A girl named Maria Santos walked up, eyes wide, her smile trembling. Her mother worked 2 shifts cleaning downtown offices, same as my mom had once upon a time. I clapped for her like she was my sister, and in some ways she was. Jessica's group had gone completely silent now, their clapping slow, unsure, mechanical. Brad leaned into her ear, whispering something urgent, but she shook her head in tiny, frantic motions. Her name, attached to a foundation, was being repeated by everyone in the room, but she had no idea why. That name wasn't her legacy anymore. It was mine, and every syllable carved into it came from the pain they handed me 12 years ago. The second scholarship recipient was James Chin, Sarah's younger brother, who walked up with quiet grace and the kind of posture you only get when you've carried burdens heavier than textbooks. Sarah was in the front row now, her eyes not on James, but on me. Recognition flickered in her face, a slow-burning realization that began somewhere deep in her memory and worked its way forward. I gave her a small nod, and she inhaled sharply, understanding more in that moment than any whispered explanation could offer. Her smile was soft but fierce, like she suddenly saw a different version of me she hadn't known existed. The scholarships continued, each recipient rising like a candle being lit. And with each name I watched classmates. Eyes flicked toward me, then back to Jessica, their confusion growing. The murmurs were louder now, threads of, "Did you know?" and "That's not their money, right?" weaving through the applause. People had started to do math, the kind of math that didn't add up with Jessica's Instagram-ready lifestyle. Phones were out again, but this time they weren't filming the stage. They were taking pictures of her. Finally, when the last recipient sat down, Williams made a final announcement about the dinner service and thanked everyone again. The room began to hum with conversations, but the center of gravity had shifted. I turned and started walking back toward the back of the room. I didn't need to say anything. Not yet. The unraveling had begun. I made my way toward the refreshment table, the crowd parting around me with a strange sort of reverence. Some people avoided eye contact, uncertain of what they'd just witnessed, while others stared with a curiosity too sharp to be polite. I kept my expression modest, almost shy, still playing the part of the underdog they believed I was. But behind my lowered lashes, I was watching everything. Every whispered question, every shift in posture, every nervous glance toward Jessica. The cracks in her facade were beginning to spiderweb. Ashley and Brittany peeled off from the crowd, heading to the restroom with the synchronized urgency of women who needed to recalibrate. I watched them go without turning my head, only my eyes tracking their movements. Jessica remained planted near the front, her body stiff and her smile forced, as people began offering congratulations she couldn't accept. Brad stood beside her like a man suddenly unsure of which side he was on. He kept glancing at her, as if expecting her to confess something he didn't know. I waited until I saw Ashley and Brittany disappear behind the bathroom door before moving. Timing was everything, and I didn't want to miss the most important scene of the night. I walked calmly through the crowd, murmuring polite "excuse me's" as I passed classmates, who were now whispering my name like a spell. I pushed open the door just as Brittany said, Who names a foundation after someone and doesn't tell them? Her voice echoed slightly against the tile and metal stalls. I stepped inside just as Ashley responded. Unless it wasn't her who did it at all. Brittany turned at the sound of the door, her reflection in the mirror flickering with panic for just a second. "Elena," she said, too loudly, too brightly, like I might have missed the entire conversation. I smiled gently, tilting my head as though I didn't notice the sharp change in tone. "It's been such a beautiful night," I said, stepping up to the sink beside them. Ashley's lipstick hovered just above her reflection as she watched me in the mirror. "Really beautiful," she echoed, the words flat as paper. "All those scholarships. Incredible." Brittany nodded with robotic enthusiasm, but her eyes couldn't stay on mine. They were calculating, searching, trying to fit puzzle pieces that refused to align. "Jessica must be so proud," she added, but even she heard the irony and immediately looked down. I reached for a paper towel, drying my hands slowly. "I think the recipients were the proud ones," I said, my voice soft and unthreatening. "Did you see Maria's face when her name was called?" Ashley swallowed and nodded, lipstick finally making contact with her upper lip. "Yeah," she said too quickly. "You could tell it meant the world to her." I dropped the towel into the trash and smiled, letting silence settle like dust. "I should get back," Brittany mumbled, grabbing her clutch with more force than necessary. Ashley followed her out without another word, heels tapping too fast against the tile. I stayed behind a moment longer, staring at my reflection. The fluorescent lighting washed me out, made my tired makeup look cheaper, and for the first time tonight, I let myself really see the version of me I'd built for them. She was pitiful, and she was perfect. Back in the gym, the energy had changed again, like a storm rolling in that hadn't broken yet. Groups huddled together, some watching Jessica, others stealing glances at me as I passed. I returned to the photo memorial table and pretended to study the images of classmates who hadn't lived long enough to be mocked tonight. The silence around Jessica's group had thickened, their laughter gone, replaced by frantic side conversations. I gave it a few minutes, then took a slow breath and crossed the floor. I approached Jessica's group as naturally as I could, the weight of 30 pairs of eyes making every step heavier. Brad looked up first, surprise flickering across his face before he forced a strained smile. "Elena," he said, his voice full of something he probably thought sounded like respect. "That was a pretty moving moment up there." Jessica's smile didn't reach her eyes as she added, "Yes, incredible how many lives that foundation will touch." I nodded, my voice quiet. It was important to me that the right people were chosen. Jessica blinked, a question clearly forming, but I didn't give her the chance to ask it. "Deserving students who've overcome the kinds of obstacles most people can't even imagine." I let the statement sit there, passive on the surface, barbed beneath. Ashley and Brittany were approaching behind me now, rejoining their husbands with the energy of soldiers returning from a losing battle. Mike Hartwell gave me a quick nod. "The kind you give someone you realize may have more power than you thought." "Martinez Foundation, huh?" he said, like he was fishing for confirmation. "Great name, strong branding. You involved somehow?" I tilted my head like I didn't understand the question, then answered with practiced humility. "I might have had a small role in making it happen." Jessica's gaze sharpened, her eyes scanning my face for something she could cling to. "But the name," she said slowly, "Martinez, as in my mother's last name." I said gently, interrupting her with calm finality. "She always said our name would stand for something, even if we had to build it ourselves." A few people nearby gasped, not loudly, but enough to be heard. Jessica blinked rapidly, her eyes suddenly glassy. "My mom cleaned houses," I added, staring directly into Brittany's eyes. "She used to fold fitted sheets for people who didn't remember her name. Now her name's on a plaque those people's children will read every year." Brittany took a step back, mouth slightly open, but said nothing. Ashley was looking at Jessica like she wasn't sure what side to stand on anymore. "I'm not here to take anything from anyone," I said, still calm, still centered. "Just wanted to be part of the community again." I shrugged, like it didn't matter, like their reactions weren't written into my plan like choreography. But Jessica's face was already crumbling. her makeup intact, her pride not so much. "So this is revenge?" she asked quietly, the words tasting wrong in her mouth. "No," I replied, not even pretending to think about it. "It's a reminder." I looked around at the familiar faces, most of them stunned into silence. That kindness costs less than cruelty, but the returns on it are so much greater. Jessica stood frozen, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if holding herself together. Her smile had collapsed into a tight line, the gloss cracking at the corners of her lips. Brad looked at her, then at me, his jaw clenched as realization flickered behind his eyes. Ashley and Brittany exchanged glances but said nothing, their silence more damning than any apology could be. The group that once radiated untouchable confidence now looked like a collection of porcelain dolls beginning to crack. I turned away before any of them could speak again, not because I was done, but because they needed time to stew in it. Every second they spent wondering how deep the rabbit hole went made the reveal sweeter. I drifted through the crowd, smiling at people who now looked at me with something approaching awe. It was the same gym, same floor, same walls. But now I was the one everyone watched. Near the refreshments table, Tom Williams approached with a beer in one hand and a hesitant smile. "Hey, Elena," he said, his voice careful, like he was speaking to someone whose opinion suddenly mattered. "That Martinez stuff, really impressive. You know, I've got a mortgage through." He stopped, eyes widening as the pieces clicked into place. I raised an eyebrow and waited, letting him finish the math on his own. "Martinez Financial Services," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the music. Are you connected to them?" I gave a small shrug, my smile the same one I used in boardrooms when someone guessed a bit too much. "I may have some investments here and there." He nodded slowly, the kind of nod people give when they realize they've underestimated the wrong person. "I always thought you were smart," Tom added, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Back in econ class, you crushed those simulations." I thanked him, letting the compliment land without deflecting it. It was nice to hear now, even if it had been a long time coming. He opened his mouth to say something else, but was cut off by a voice from the speakers. "Folks," Principal Williams called out, "please take your seats again. We've got a few more recognitions to go through before dessert is served." Chairs scraped against the floor, conversations paused, and the crowd began to gather once more. Jessica didn't move at first, clearly debating whether she could fake her way through another round of public exposure. Brad finally touched her elbow, and they walked to the front like two people being led to sentencing. I stayed at the back this time, standing near the memorial table again. My fingers grazed the photo of Luis Ramirez, a classmate who died in a car crash junior year. He had been kind to me once, helped me pick up my books after someone knocked them down. That kindness had stayed with me longer than he had. It was strange what small moments you carried forever. As the names of award recipients and alumni donors were read aloud, I scanned the room for reactions. Jessica's smile was gone completely now, replaced with a look that hovered somewhere between panic and disbelief. Ashley whispered something to Mike, whose brow furrowed with each passing sentence. Brittany stared straight ahead, her face unreadable, but pale. Every time Martinez came out of Williams's mouth, I saw the same twitch behind Jessica's eyes. A few more names were read, none of them mine, and then the program wound down with a round of applause. The DJ resumed playing early 2010s pop songs, and people stood up slowly, like they were unsure what version of the reunion they were now attending. I wandered toward the open bar, nodding at a few people who smiled cautiously at me. "Elena?" someone said behind me, and I turned to see Sarah Chin. "Hey," I greeted her, genuinely glad to see someone who had never laughed at me. "Your brother's speech was incredible." Sarah's eyes were warm, but alert. "James is still in shock, honestly. We never thought college was even an option after everything with our dad's injury." "He's earned it," I said simply, and Sarah's hand tightened around her glass. "I know you don't want credit, but I know it was you." Her voice was quiet but certain. I didn't deny it, just offered a small smile. I just wanted to make sure the right people had a chance. The kind of people who won't waste it." Sarah blinked quickly, like she was trying to hold back tears. "He won't. I promise." I believed her, and that was enough. We talked a few more minutes before she was pulled away by someone needing a photo. I turned back toward the bar and saw Brad standing there, alone, drink untouched in his hand. I debated walking away, but curiosity won out. I stepped beside him and waited. "Elena," he said after a moment, voice low and unsteady. "That Martinez Foundation, it's not Jessica's, is it?" I said nothing, just sipped from my glass and waited. "It's you." All of this, the promotions, the raises, the scholarship. I nodded once, watching the blood drain from his face. Brad looked down at the bar, shaking his head slightly. "I've been working for you this whole time." His voice held no malice, just disbelief. "Jessica's been taking credit for a life she didn't build." I didn't answer, because it wasn't a question. It was a confession. "Why?" he finally asked, his eyes meeting mine. "Why do all this for people who treated you like that?" I looked past him, watching Jessica laugh too loudly with a group of strangers who didn't know her yet. "Because someone once told me that dignity doesn't come from being seen," I said. "It comes from how you carry what they throw at you." Brad blinked, clearly not expecting that. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I was already walking away. There were still more people I needed to see, more illusions that needed to crumble. And the night was far from over. Revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about truth. The DJ's next track thumped lightly beneath the murmur of shaken conversations, but nobody was really dancing anymore. Most people hovered in awkward clusters, glancing toward Jessica's group like something might explode if they looked away too long. She stood stiffly by the photo booth backdrop, her smile visibly forced, as if hoping it might glue her social standing back together. Brittany and Ashley flanked her again, but their postures had shifted, less like a trio and more like two people slowly stepping away from a sinking ship. The cracks in Jessica's armor were no longer subtle. I watched from a distance, sipping a soda I didn't particularly want, letting the silence stretch between my actions. Brad was still at the bar, hunched over his untouched whiskey like it could offer him answers he didn't want to hear. Mike and Derek had vanished somewhere after their last stiff interactions, likely trying to confirm the rumors now whispering through the gym like smoke. Jessica's husband might have been her shield once, but now he looked more like the first casualty. And Jessica, for all her theatrics, had no script prepared for public unraveling. I wasn't cruel, not by nature, but I wasn't soft either. Not anymore. So when I walked back toward the memory table, it wasn't to hide. I positioned myself where the lighting was dim and the crowd thinner, but my line of sight to Jessica remained perfectly clear. I wanted her to see me, not in confrontation, but in reflection, like a ghost from a past she'd tried to bury beneath privilege. And when our eyes locked again, the flash of uncertainty in her expression was almost enough to make me speak. Instead, I turned to the scholarship board and adjusted a photo that had come slightly loose. James Chin's shy grin looked out from behind the glass, and I allowed myself a real smile. His essay had been filled with dreams so practical they made my chest ache. Just enough ambition to survive, not enough to believe he could thrive. That's what poverty teaches you, to dream small and be grateful. But tonight, he'd stood on stage and realized he might finally deserve more. "Thought I'd find you back here," Sarah said softly, stepping beside me again. "You've always had a habit of disappearing just when people start noticing you." I laughed quietly, the sound brief and genuine. Old habits, I guess. Sometimes it's easier to control the story from the sidelines. Her smile was knowing, touched with sadness. "I never knew what they did to you back then." "Not all of it. I remember some of it, but not like this." Her voice lowered further, not out of secrecy, but respect. "They had no idea who you were, still don't." I tilted my head slightly, eyes on Jessica's frozen posture across the room. "That's the problem with people like her," I said. "They confuse loudness with power, cruelty with strength." Sarah nodded, her eyes following my gaze. And kindness with weakness, she added, until it owns everything under their feet. We stood in silence for a few more seconds, both watching as Jessica attempted to laugh along with someone who looked deeply uncomfortable. I didn't know if that person was a stranger or a classmate trying to remember why they liked her. Either way, the distance around her was growing. Even in a crowded room, she was starting to look very, very alone. And she knew it. My phone buzzed quietly in my purse. A notification from my property manager confirming a finalized lease termination. I didn't need to open it to know which business it referred to. Jessica's boutique, Très Chic, occupied a building I'd purchased discreetly 6 months earlier. I'd already drafted plans for a community tutoring center to take its place, 1 block from her daughter's private dance studio. The irony was almost poetic. "Hey, Elena," came a new voice, one I hadn't expected, and I turned to find Derek Cole standing a few feet away. His tie was loose, his smile sheepish, and his expression somewhere between regret and admiration. Didn't want to leave without saying, well, something. He rubbed the back of his neck like he used to in high school when he forgot his homework. "You've done well, really well." I offered him a polite nod, nothing more. "Glad to hear you're doing okay," I replied. "I know your firm's been making changes lately." His smile faded a touch, the weight of that reminder settling visibly across his features. "Yeah, about that. Is there anything I can do?" The question hovered, awkwardly, like a lifeline tossed into a riptide. "I think what you do next will matter more than anything you say right now," I answered gently. "Especially to your kids." He nodded slowly, then gave me a small, grateful smile and walked away. His exit felt final in a way that words couldn't touch. He'd been changed tonight, even if he didn't know how deeply yet. Jessica hadn't moved, but her posture had. She was no longer standing tall. She was retreating inward, curling into herself like someone bracing for a storm. Her dress, flawless at the beginning of the night, now looked like a costume she couldn't wait to shed. Ashley was checking her phone obsessively, and Brittany stood just a few inches farther than friendship would normally allow. The divide wasn't obvious, but it was growing. A wedge driven not by betrayal, but by exposure. I walked closer, not to speak, not yet, but to let proximity finish what truth had started. Jessica looked up just as I stopped beside the dessert table, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Congratulations," she said, the word delivered like a stone wrapped in silk. "Quite a performance," I smiled gently, not biting, not mocking. "Funny," I said. "I was thinking the same about yours." Her lips parted, probably for a retort, but nothing came out. I turned toward the exit doors, the weight of my purse lighter than it had felt in years. The night wasn't over, but her reign definitely was. I didn't leave the reunion that second. I wasn't done. Not yet. I wandered slowly toward the hallway just outside the gym, letting the hum of conversation fade behind me. The fluorescent lights in the corridor buzzed faintly, casting their pale glow across lockers that hadn't changed in over a decade. It was eerie, standing in that hallway again, but this time I wasn't the girl staring down at her own shoes. A few people passed me, murmuring quiet hellos or offering vague smiles, but no one lingered. Word had already traveled beyond the gym walls, carried on text messages and whispered retellings. My name had gone from afterthought to headline in the space of an hour. I leaned against a locker near the water fountain, letting the metal cool the heat rising in my chest. Then I heard footsteps. Hesitant, soft-souled, deliberate. Jessica rounded the corner like someone not used to being unsure of herself. She paused when she saw me, eyes scanning my face, calculating whether I'd speak first. I didn't. Instead, I crossed my arms gently and tilted my head, waiting. She finally broke the silence with a voice that sounded less like Jessica Martinez and more like a kid who'd lost something. "I didn't know," she said quietly, words strung together like apology and excuse all at once. "I had no idea any of it was you." Her arms wrapped around herself, like she needed protection from what the truth had become. Why didn't you just say something before?" I looked at her. This former queen of cruelty, now stripped down to her uncertainty. "Because you wouldn't have heard me," I said. soft but firm. Not then. She blinked, like that hadn't occurred to her. Like the idea that someone could exist outside her narrative was foreign. You only see what you're looking for, Jessica. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. I took a step closer, not to threaten, but to clarify. You saw someone beneath you, and so you treated me that way. The only time you paid attention was when you thought I was weak. She flinched at that, not visibly, but something behind her eyes flickered. I never meant, she started, but stopped herself, realizing the words sounded ridiculous. Okay, I did, she admitted, swallowing hard, but we were kids. Teenagers. I've changed since then. I didn't laugh, though the temptation tugged at the corner of my mouth. Then why did you make fun of my job in front of 30 people tonight? Her face turned crimson, guilt and embarrassment colliding in her expression. Why turn me into a joke? Again, if you've really changed. Her silence was the most honest thing she'd said all night. I thought, she began, then faltered again. I guess I thought it would be funny. I thought people would laugh and that it would be harmless. She looked down, suddenly fascinated by the scuff marks on the floor. I didn't realize it was still in me. I let the quiet stretch, giving her time to feel it. That's the thing about cruelty, I said. It doesn't announce itself with a villain's laugh, it whispers. It blends in with what feels normal until someone holds a mirror up to it. Jessica nodded slowly, shoulders slumped. She didn't look like the girl who used to command attention from the top of cafeteria tables. She looked like someone unraveling in real time. You must hate me, she said quietly, almost childishly. You could have ruined us all tonight. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't ruin you. I helped your husband get promoted. I helped your daughter's school stay open. I helped your boutique survive the pandemic. I let that last line hang before finishing. Until tonight, her eyes shot up, the realization slicing deeper than anything I could have said outright. You knew about Emma's dance program? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. You knew that was you? I didn't answer directly. It could have stayed that way forever, I said. I didn't need credit. I just didn't want to be someone's cautionary tale anymore. The hallway felt heavier now, like it remembered our old stories too well. I'm sorry, Jessica finally said, voice raw and bare. For high school, for tonight, for everything in between. She sounded like she meant it, or at least like she was trying to, and maybe that was enough. I don't need your apology, I said, and her face tightened. But I hope your daughter grows up knowing how to treat people better than you did. The words weren't meant to punish. They were meant to land. And they did. I left her there, standing between her past and her consequences, and returned to the gym. People were dancing now, though the rhythm was less chaotic than earlier. A slow song played, something nostalgic but soft. I moved through the room without drawing too much attention, just enough to remind them I was still part of this story, still the girl they overlooked, only now she had chapters they'd never read. Near the catering table, I spotted Maria Santos and her mother holding plates of dessert and laughing quietly. Their joy was contagious, bright and sincere, untouched by the tension of the other guests. I didn't interrupt them. I just watched, taking in the simple beauty of a future rewritten by a single opportunity. That was the part of this night I would carry with me long after the last streamer fell. Sarah Chin found me again near the exit. You ready to go? She asked gently, eyes scanning the room like she'd never expected to see it this way. Almost, I replied, just taking one last look. The banner above the stage fluttered slightly in the breeze from the vent, still reading McKinley High, class of 2013 to 12 years strong. I read it once, then again. The irony wasn't lost on me. Some of us had only just started growing. I stood near the exit for another minute, breathing in the strange mixture of nostalgia and closure that clung to the air like dust. My old high school gym had never looked so small, but tonight, it had held the entire arc of a redemption story that most people wouldn't believe if they hadn't seen it themselves. Jessica was still in the room, quieter now, surrounded by the same people who once orbited her like planets, only their gravity had shifted. No one whispered in her ear anymore. They were whispering about her instead. As I walked out into the cool night air, my heels clicking against the pavement, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The parking lot was quieter now, headlights flashing occasionally as guests left in pairs or small groups. My ride was still waiting at the far end, the same nondescript sedan I'd arrived in. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money, just the kind of car someone like Target Elena would drive. Even in my exit, the illusion stayed intact. The driver nodded politely as I approached, opening the back door without a word. I slid into the seat and looked out the window one last time, catching a glimpse of the banner still glowing faintly inside the gym. McKinley High, class of 2013, 12 years strong. The irony hadn't stopped stinging. We weren't strong because of who we were back then. We were strong because of what we chose to become afterward. Back to the hotel, Miss Rodriguez? The driver asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. I nodded, but my voice was softer than I expected when I replied. Yeah, and call Marta in the morning. Let her know we'll move forward with the Riverside Tutoring Center. I want the permits submitted by Tuesday. He didn't respond with surprise. He never did. As the car pulled away, I leaned my head against the window, the glass cool against my temple. I could already feel the shift in the air around town that would come by morning. The story would spread faster than anything ever had in our sleepy little community. They'd say I waited 12 years to strike back, but that wasn't true. I hadn't struck. I'd built. My mind wandered back to my mother, her weathered hands scrubbing floors in houses owned by women like Jessica. She never complained, never once let herself believe she was less than the people she cleaned for. You don't have to outshine them, she used to say. Just outlast them. I carried that lesson through every failed pitch meeting, every all-nighter, every moment I wanted to quit. Back in my suite, I sat at the small desk by the window, pulling out the Target name tag from my purse. I turned it over in my hands, running a thumb across the scratched plastic surface. It had been a costume piece, but it was also a truth I hadn't forgotten. I had worked retail. I had struggled. The difference was that I'd never pretended to be anything else. Only they had. They wore confidence like a mask, mistaking volume for value and cruelty for power. I'd played their game tonight, but I'd done it on my terms. My success wasn't revenge. It was resilience. And now, it was also legacy. I picked up my phone and opened the group message I kept with the foundation board. Great event tonight. Local press will likely pick up coverage from community photos. Prepare press release with neutral tone. Focus on students, not donors. Martinez's name must always stand for empowerment, never ego. I hit send, then stared at the screen for a moment longer before locking it. The next morning brought an early email from our media director with a clipped subject line. Viral. I opened the message to find links already spreading, videos, reels, photos. Snippets from the reunion had made it onto multiple platforms overnight. One video had already been viewed over 300,000 times. The clip showed Jessica's voice, unmistakable, saying, "Still working retail, huh?" Followed by her husband's voice mimicking a job interview. The video cut to my quiet nod, my discount dress, and then later to Principal Williams announcing the Martinez Foundation. The final shot was Jessica clapping uncomfortably, with the caption, "When you mock the woman funding your child's future." I wasn't tagged, but everyone local knew. My inbox started filling with requests, interviews, speaking engagements, podcast invites. I ignored most of them. The point of last night had never been exposure. It was about recognition without the spotlight. By noon, 2 of the mothers from the PTA had emailed the foundation to thank us, asking if they could volunteer with scholarship coordination. One of them was Brittany's neighbor. I replied with a warm message, CCing our volunteer coordinator. There was no reason to punish everyone just because some had forgotten their empathy. By evening, the boutique lease termination had made its way through to Jessica. I knew because the building manager called to confirm the delivery had been signed. There was no press release, no letter with my name on it. Just a notice with a date and the standard reminder about renovation timelines. It wasn't a punishment. It was a transfer of space from vanity to value. That night, I met Sarah for dinner at a quiet place downtown. one she'd recommended. She looked relieved when I arrived in jeans and a sweater, no makeup, hair up in a bun. "You look like you again," she said with a smile. I laughed softly. "Last night was the costume." She nodded, sipping her drink before saying, "So what now?" I thought about it, swirling the ice in my glass. "Now I keep doing what I was always doing," I said, "building things that outlast the ones who tried to break me." Sarah leaned in, expression serious now. "You changed people last night. Not just Jessica, not just the guys. A lot of people saw something they needed to." I shrugged, not out of modesty, but because I knew she was right. "I didn't go to the reunion to change them," I said quietly. "I went so I could walk away." Sarah smiled at that, and the clink of glasses between us felt more like a closing chapter than a celebration. We didn't toast to revenge. We toasted to restoration. A few days later, I returned to the office, the quiet hum of productivity greeting me like an old friend. My team worked in a repurposed textile building downtown, now lined with exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and whiteboards filled with ideas in dry erase hieroglyphics. No one treated me like a CEO with something to prove. They treated me like someone who already had. I liked that. Respect without pedestal was always the goal. Nora, my assistant, greeted me with a folder labeled Community Response, McKinley Reunion. I flipped it open, scanning the printouts and emails compiled inside, ranging from local teachers thanking us for the scholarships to anonymous submissions describing what the reunion had revealed about our town's quiet rot. A surprising number were from classmates, some apologizing, some confessing, most reflecting. I didn't need their guilt, but I valued their honesty. Truth was heavier than remorse, and that was the weight I respected. One email stood out, written by a woman I hadn't spoken to in years, Michelle Torres. She'd been a part of the student council back then, someone who didn't laugh with Jessica, but never stopped her either. Her message was detailed and sincere. She recalled my prom dress, my library volunteer hours, and my mother's gentle voice at PTA meetings. She said her teenage silence was the loudest regret of her life. I read it twice, then drafted a reply that didn't absolve her, but welcomed her forward. After I set the folder aside, I walked into the foundation wing, a side of the company that rarely needed my direct presence anymore. The team there operated like clockwork, managing grant applications, scholarship vetting, and alumni outreach with a kind of grace I deeply admired. Still, I needed to see the wall. Lined with framed photos and first-page essays, it was our tribute to the students we'd lifted. Maria Santos's frame had just been added, her photo flanked by two other smiling scholarship recipients from this year's class. Her essay was printed beneath it, titled "The Quiet Things That Save Us." I traced her name with one finger, remembering her mother's worn shoes and the way they'd both lit up during the announcement. Maria would become someone this world couldn't ignore. Back in my office, I sat at the window and stared out at the city we were reshaping, one building, one student, one truth at a time. The skyline had changed in 12 years, and so had I. The girl in the bathroom stall, counting seconds until the bell saved her, now funded community wellness centers and pushed legislation on educational equity. But I had never traded one version of myself for another. I had folded both into something stronger. Later that afternoon, a text came from an unknown number, Jessica Martinez. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "You can come by tomorrow, 1 o'clock. No entourage." Her response was just a single word. Understood. The next day, she arrived at my office wearing the same kind of heels she used to strut down our high school hallways in, though now they seemed less like weapons and more like shields. Her makeup was subdued, her outfit modest, and her expression unreadable. I offered her a seat, then sat across from her, hands folded. She glanced around at the office but didn't comment. "Thank you for agreeing to this," she said, voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I don't have long," I replied, not unkindly. "Say what you need to." She took a breath and looked down at her lap, fingers fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "I lost the boutique space. I know it was you." I didn't respond, letting the silence do what it always did, reveal truth. "At first, I was angry," she said, "really angry. But then I looked at the building permit request. A tutoring center, Elena. Her voice cracked just slightly on the word. That's right, I answered. A place where kids can come after school to get help they can't afford elsewhere. Somewhere Emma might need one day. She blinked at the mention of her daughter's name but didn't interrupt. Your boutique sold dresses. My mother used to iron dresses like that in your friends' homes. Jessica's eyes welled up, but she kept her voice steady. I was cruel to you. She didn't try to soften it, didn't couch it in excuses this time. And I don't know how to undo it, but I don't want Emma to grow up thinking that's how strength works. Then show her better, I said simply. Teach her to lead with something other than fear. Jessica nodded slowly, her face pale but firm. I'd like to donate to the tutoring center, not through my business. From me. I considered her words carefully, searching for performance in her posture but finding none. Write the check, I said, but leave your name off the plaque. She looked confused. Why? I smiled faintly. Because sometimes the best thing you can give a community is a gift without a signature. Jessica swallowed, nodded, and stood. Thank you, she said again, her voice more breath than words. As she reached the door, she paused. Was there ever a moment when you thought about humiliating me in return? I tilted my head slightly. Only once, I admitted, but then I remembered that legacy tastes better than revenge. She left quietly, and I leaned back in my chair, watching the sunlight paint soft angles across the room. A few minutes later, Nora poked her head in. The Martinez Foundation press packet is finalized. Want me to approve for print? I nodded. Include the updated mission line at the bottom, I said. Character is legacy. As the office settled back into its rhythm, I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed. Not the sharp inhale of defensiveness, not the tight breath of survival, but the kind that feels like coming up for air after years underwater. That was the thing about justice done right. It didn't echo like vengeance. It resonated like freedom. By the end of that week, the local newspaper ran a feature about the new tutoring center breaking ground in the heart of downtown. They titled it, From Humiliation to Hope, Local Foundation Transforms Former Boutique into Community Learning Hub. The article mentioned the Martinez Foundation and detailed its mission, but made no reference to Jessica or her past connection to the property. That omission was deliberate. We weren't rewriting history. We were just choosing not to let pettiness narrate it. The construction team started clearing out the old space that Friday morning, and I stood across the street watching as the boutique sign came down. The cursive logo, once proudly displayed in photos on Jessica's social feed, was now tucked under a painter's tarp. A small group gathered on the sidewalk. A local teacher, 2 scholarship students, and Sarah Chen, who had taken personal interest in the project's rollout. Sarah handed out flyers for early enrollment, while I quietly observed from under the brim of my sun hat. Some victories didn't need to be loud. Across the street, someone snapped a photo and waved at me, and I waved back without stepping into the spotlight. It wasn't about me anymore. It never really had been. It was about the Maria Santoses of the world, and every kid who'd grown up thinking their worth depended on how invisible they could make their need. The tutoring center would have glass walls, not to show off, but to keep things transparent. We weren't hiding success. We were building access to it. That afternoon, my team held our quarterly community meeting at the foundation's headquarters, and the energy was electric. The boardroom was packed with educators, volunteers, and even 2 former scholarship recipients who had returned to give back. One of them, a young woman named Tasha, had once been on the verge of dropping out until her grant allowed her to finish nursing school. She now worked at the local clinic and spent weekends teaching CPR to high schoolers. She hugged me tightly at the end of her presentation, whispering, "You saved my life," and I whispered back, "No, you did." I ended the meeting with a brief address, 5 minutes. Nothing dramatic. I reminded everyone that our goal wasn't to create stars. It was to build systems that made success ordinary. If we do this right, I said, one day this kind of generosity won't feel exceptional. It'll feel expected. There were nods around the room, and a few misty eyes, but no applause. We didn't need it. Later that evening, I received a voicemail from Brad Martinez. His voice was tense but composed. like someone rehearsing civility under pressure. "Elena, I just wanted to reach out and say thank you. I know you didn't have to help us, and I know we didn't deserve it. I've been offered a relocation package from another branch, and we'll be moving out of state. I hope our paths don't cross again, but for what it's worth, I respect what you've done." I listened twice before deleting it. His words weren't for me. They were for his own conscience, something he'd finally started listening to. I bore no ill will toward him. Not anymore. The man who once mocked my job title now understood the fragility of a ladder he hadn't built. Let him rebuild somewhere else, preferably with fewer mirrors. That weekend, Sarah invited me to her house for dinner. Something simple, she said, just close friends and stories too old to tell publicly. I arrived with a bottle of wine and a small potted plant for her kitchen windowsill. She introduced me to her husband, her 2 dogs, and her younger cousin James, the same James who had nervously accepted his scholarship on stage just weeks before. He was calmer now, more grounded, as though the weight of uncertainty had finally lifted. After dinner, we sat on the porch, warm light spilling through the windows behind us. The sounds of cicadas filled the pauses between conversation, and for once, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. Sarah leaned her elbows on her knees and asked, "Do you think they'll ever really change?" I didn't ask who she meant. I knew. "Some of them," I said after a pause, "but the rest will just spend their lives pretending they already did." She nodded, thoughtful. "You didn't just teach them a lesson, Elena. You taught the rest of us something too." I smiled faintly and took a sip of tea. "Well," I said, "they were very thorough teachers. I just gave them a pop quiz." We laughed, and the sound felt real. Not performative, not sharp, just clean and full of relief. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I'd laughed like that without caution. Not since before McKinley, before prom night, before posters got torn down from lockers and whispers turned into walls. I was finally someone I could recognize without flinching. When I left her house that night, I drove past McKinley High one last time. The lights were off now, the gym dark, the banners from the reunion long since taken down. I thought about sneaking one, folding it up, saving it as proof that the night really happened. But I didn't need physical evidence anymore. The truth was already stitched into too many lives to ever be erased. As I pulled into my driveway, my porch light flicked on automatically, welcoming me home. I reached into my bag and pulled out the Target name tag again, just for a second. I studied the plastic surface, every scratch, every faded edge. Then I set it gently on my hallway table beside my keys, not as a trophy, but as a monument. I went upstairs, changed into pajamas, and opened my laptop. My inbox was full again, notes from board members, parents, and a request from a public school in Chicago asking if we'd consider expanding the foundation's model. I smiled, already knowing the answer. I typed 3 words, "Let's do it." The next few weeks passed in a blur of logistics, expansion planning, and quiet moments of reflection. Our board unanimously approved the pilot program for Chicago, and a follow-up call with their superintendent confirmed full cooperation. It felt surreal watching the framework I built in secret now stretch its arms across state lines. I used to wonder what it would feel like to make it, but success, I've learned, doesn't always come with confetti. It comes with spreadsheets, conference calls, and lives quietly redirected. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Back in my hometown, the tutoring center's foundation had been poured, the framework rising day by day. People walked by during construction, often slowing down to ask questions, some bringing their kids to peek through the fence. No one mentioned the boutique anymore. It had disappeared from local memory faster than I expected, replaced by conversations about after-school programs and mentoring opportunities. Even the small bakery next door had renamed a cupcake after our foundation, the Martinez Mini. At my office, a letter arrived in the mail with a return address I didn't recognize. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper, neat and written in purple pen. "Dear Miss Elena," it began, "my mom says you paid for me to go to school when we couldn't afford it. She says I should say thank you, but I also wanted to tell you that I want to be like you when I grow up. I read it 3 times before placing it in my desk drawer, beside the Target name tag. The contrast between the two sat heavily in my chest. One had been worn like a warning, the other, written like a wish. And together they told the truth about who I had been and who I chose to become. I never heard from Jessica again directly, though I caught whispers here and there. She and Brad relocated to Oregon, where he took a job at a smaller firm. Her boutique's online store was still active, though it had rebranded entirely and removed her name from the logo. Whether she'd learned anything was no longer my concern. She had her mirror now. Whether she looked into it or not was her own choice. Ashley stayed in town, and to my quiet surprise, signed up to volunteer at the tutoring center. She never approached me, never apologized, but every Saturday morning, she showed up with her sleeves rolled and a car full of donated supplies. I let her actions speak louder than her past. Redemption, after all, is a private journey. And sometimes, silence says more than confession ever could. Brittany remained mostly silent, visible on social media, but increasingly absent in real life. Her husband left the dealership when Premier Motors took over, and last I heard, they downsized to a smaller home on the other side of town. I didn't feel joy in that. I felt clarity. The structures they built on sand were never going to hold. Sarah Chin and I grew closer with time, her strength matching mine in a way I didn't realize I needed. She joined the board of the Martinez Foundation as our community liaison, becoming both the voice of our roots and the architect of our future. At meetings, she always started with updates from the field, grounded in stories and real families, not charts. She understood better than anyone that numbers didn't change lives, people did, and I trusted her with that responsibility more than anyone. At the end of the year, we hosted our first formal scholarship gala, this time fully public, no anonymity, no shadow games. It was held at the same event center where my startup had once pitched for seed funding. I walked in wearing a tailored navy dress, hair swept back, not for style but for comfort. I spoke for 10 minutes, and I told them the truth. I used to think survival was enough, I said, the microphone warm in my hand. But survival is a baseline. Legacy, that's something else. I paused, scanning the room. I came from a home where we counted coins and prayed they were enough. Now, I help children write essays about their dreams instead of their limitations. The room was quiet as I finished, not out of awkwardness, but out of reverence. I saw tears, yes, but more than that, I saw resolve. People ready to help in ways they never imagined before. As the evening ended, I stood near the back of the room, watching former classmates, new students, and families blend into one cohesive current. This wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a better future on top of it. Later that night, back at home, I sat in my living room and placed the framed Target name tag on a floating shelf beside a photo of my mother. Her smile in that picture was tired but proud, her eyes soft with the kind of strength that raised me. I whispered into the quiet room, "We did it." It wasn't for theatrics. It was for her. I received one last message before bed, this time a simple photo. Maria Santos in a dorm room, surrounded by textbooks, grinning from ear to ear. She'd written first day, "I'm nervous, but I feel like I belong." I stared at the screen for a long moment, heart full. That sentence was worth more than every check I'd ever written. As I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. The girl who had been mocked for her job title was now signing letters that changed lives. And none of it came from revenge. It came from remembering who I was before they tried to convince me otherwise. Thank you for listening to Elena's story. If you're yet to subscribe, please consider doing so before watching another story on the channel.